Chapter 22. My stomach tightened in fear. I had a sudden impulse to grab the wheel, to try to turn us around. Randy's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, wow," she murmured, glancing at a street sign, half covered by low trees. She lowered her foot on the brake and the car slowed to a stop. "Randy, what?" I choked out. "I'm so messed up I turned the wrong way," she replied, shaking her head. "I didn't even think." She took a deep breath. "Sorry, Natalie, I didn't even realize." She waited for a gray van to rumble past. Then she made a wide U-turn, and we headed the other way, the right way, on Old Mill Road. "I'll try to get us there in one piece," Randy said, gripping the wheel tightly with both hands. She leaned forward and peered straight ahead into the gray morning, the cold gray morning. Even the hot air blasting from the heater couldn't warm me, couldn't stop the shivers that shook my body. "I'll feel better after we tell our story," I thought, "but will I ever feel normal again?" We parked in a small, empty asphalt lot beside the station. A cold sleet began to drizzle down as we climbed out of the car. The lights were on in the station house. I had never been here before. It was a small, two-story building of white stucco. The front door was heavier than I'd imagined. It took me 2 tries to pull it open. I held it open for Randy, then followed her in, shaking the cold water from my hair. The waiting room had 2 long wooden benches facing each other. The benches were empty. A blackboard on the waiting room wall had a chalked announcement about a police basketball tournament. A young officer in a blue uniform sat at the front desk, reading a newspaper. He had 2 white styrofoam cups of coffee steaming in front of him. As Randy and I hesitantly approached, he lowered the newspaper and took a long sip from one of the cups. "Help you?" We nodded. "We have to talk to someone," I managed to choke out. All of the words I'd rehearsed vanished completely from my mind. The officer had bright blue eyes. He scratched his curly blonde hair, took another sip of coffee. About the mayor's sister? About the accident?" Randy told him. She had her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her coat. Her voice sounded tense, high. The officer's blue eyes moved from me to Randy. "You have information about the accident?" We want to confess," I blurted out. Those words made him jump to his feet. He nearly knocked over one of the coffee cups. He was shorter than I'd thought, but powerfully built. His eyes narrowed us suspiciously. "Come with me." We followed him down a short hall of darkened offices, then around a corner. Light poured out of the corner office. The sign on the door read, "Lieutenant Fraser." I heard a man cough inside the office. Randy cast a nervous glance at me as we followed the officer into the office. Too late to back out now, I thought. My stomach was doing flip-flops. My knees felt shaky. Too late. Get it over with, Natalie, and face your punishment. Lieutenant Fraser stood behind his desk, leaning with both hands on the desktop, staring down at some sort of map. He was a tall, athletic-looking African-American man with very short hair. He wore a dark blue suit, his red necktie pulled down loosely at the collar. I saw the handle of a pistol in the brown leather holster at his waist. He raised himself from the desk and studied Randy and me as we entered. "This is Lieutenant Fraser," the young officer introduced us. "He is in charge of the Coletti case." Fraser nodded. "You girls want to talk to me?" He motioned to 2 folding chairs against the wall. Randy and I obediently sat down. "We, should have come here before," I started. My heart felt as if it had jumped into my throat. I could barely talk. "We were there that night," Randy jumped in. "I mean, we were the ones who, well," her voice trailed off. She chewed her bottom lip. Fraser pulled out his gray leather desk chair and lowered himself into it. He leaned over the desk, studying us. "You were on the dead-end street the night that Ellen Coletti was killed?" Randy and I exchanged glances. I took a deep breath. "We did it," I choked out. The lieutenant didn't blink, didn't move. "We hit her car. We killed her," I continued. He raised a hand to stop me. "Don't say any more," he warned. "You need your parents and a lawyer." "No," I told him. "We just want to tell our story. We have to tell it." "Then let me read you your rights," he murmured solemnly. He read through the list of rights I'd heard on so many TV cop shows. "Okay, what you girls want to tell me?" "It was an accident," Randy said shrilly. "Just a terrible accident. The car spun. I was driving. I tried to get in control, but we hit her from behind." "We didn't think anyone was in the car," I continued in a shaky voice. I had my hands clasped tightly in my lap. They were ice cold. "We didn't really hit the car that hard. We didn't know." Lieutenant Fraser motioned with both hands as if to say, "Calm down." "We drove away," Randy said, her voice breaking. She was so scared. She was tapping one foot up and down. "We were frightened. We didn't want to get in trouble, so we drove away. I drove away." I opened my mouth to say more, but no words came out. Fraser scribbled some notes on a legal-size yellow pad. He frowned, scribbled some more notes. Then he raised his eyes to us again. What time was it when you ran into Miss Glutty's car? I'm not really sure, Randy told him. It had to be around midnight. We were at a party, see, and, well, around midnight. The lieutenant wrote it down. And whose car were you driving? He asked Randy. I could see Randy's face redden. My parents' car, Randy replied, lowering her eyes. Could I see your driver's license? The policeman demanded, holding out his hand for it. Randy fumbled in her bag. Here it is? She dropped the license as she tried to hand it to him. It fluttered onto his desktop. He studied it for a long moment, then wrote something on his pad. What kind of car were you driving that night, Randy? He asked, his eyes on the driver's license in his hand. It's in the little parking lot. I thought you wanted to see it. Fraser nodded solemnly. Yes, I would. He stood up and gazed out the window. Just drizzling out there. He walked to the coat rack in the corner, pulled off a black leather jacket, and put it on. Follow me, girls. He led the way out of the station to the parking lot at the side. The sky had darkened until it was as black as night. The sleet had turned to large drops of rain. They made a loud pattering sound as they hit the asphalt. I pulled up my parka hood. I tried to catch Randy's eye, but she had her head lowered against the rain. Fraser walked so rapidly, Randy and I had to jog to keep up with him. Somewhere behind us, a dog barked angrily. The cars that drove by had their headlights on, even though it was the middle of the morning. Fraser stopped beside Randy's car, the only car in the lot. This yours? He asked, his eyes on the car. Yes, Randy replied. I mean, it's my parents'. Fraser rubbed his jaw. A Volvo, huh? Nice-looking car. He walked to the front of the green Volvo and bent to examine the bumper. It didn't really dent the car at all, Randy volunteered. That's why we didn't think we had hurt anybody. I mean, did you change the tires on this car? Fraser interrupted, glancing up at Randy. I mean, since the accident? Surprise registered on Randy's face. No, the tires are the same. Lieutenant Fraser rose to his feet. He turned away from the car and strode over to us. Is this a joke or something? Some kind of dare? He demanded sternly. Huh? A joke? I cried, confused. Randy gasped. What do you mean? Lieutenant Fraser squinted at us through the rain. Why are you confessing to a crime you didn't commit? Chapter 23. We walked back into the station house, but the gray cloud seemed to follow me inside. I felt as if a heavy fog had swept around me and was carrying me. I felt so helpless, so confused and out of control. Back in his office, Lieutenant Fraser explained why we hadn't been the ones who killed the mayor's sister, but his voice sounded far away to me, as if beyond a thick curtain of fog, and the black and white photos he pulled from a file and held up to us appeared more smears of gray, pieces of fog in a murky black background. Bits of his sentences stayed in my mind. The rest floated off into space. We're looking for a smaller car, I heard him say. Particles of blue paint on Miss Glutty's bumper. A blue car, not green. A spare tire. Probably an older car. I tried to focus on the photograph he showed us. It took me a long while to figure out that it was a picture of tire tracks, one tire track wider than the other. What does that mean? I wondered. Why is one track wide and the other so skinny? We got this very clear shot, Fraser said. Because of the rain, the road had a covering of wet dirt. The tire tracks showed up very distinctly. But why was he showing them to us? Finally, my mind began to stop floating, and everything came clear. Well, almost everything. It hadn't been our car that killed Ellen Coletti. That fact finally burned its way through the gray fog that swirled through my mind. It hadn't been the green Volvo. Another car had hit the mayor's sister. Before our car hit her? Was she already dead when we came skidding into that dead-end street? I didn't know. I glanced at Randy. She appeared as confused as I did. Confused, but relieved. She flashed me a tense smile. We're going to be okay, I thought. Our lives are going to be normal again. We didn't kill that woman and drive away. I suddenly felt so good. I wanted to leap up out of the folding chair in Lieutenant Fraser's office. I can fly, I thought. I can fly now. Crazy thoughts. They didn't last long, because I thought of Carlo and Jillian. Why were they dead? Why were my friends dead? They had died for nothing. There is no secret for us to keep. We didn't do it. We weren't responsible. And now 2 of the 5 kids in the car that night were dead. There's more we have to tell, I started. I don't think Fraser heard me. He was returning the photos to the file drawer. You girls are still in trouble, he said softly. Leaving the scene of an accident is serious. Our friends, I said. I knew I should tell him about Carlo and Jillian, about how their deaths might not have been accidents. but I caught Randy's harsh glare. "We've said enough for now," Randy's expression told me. "I'm going to have my officers contact your parents," Lieutenant Fraser said. "We will all have to talk again. For now, let me ask a few more questions." He asked us if we had seen any other cars on the dead-end street. He asked if we had seen anything at all that might help him. Of course, Randy and I couldn't help him. We had been so terrified that night, so eager to spin the car around and get off that dreadful street, we hadn't seen a thing. Finally, he led us back to the front desk. The young officer was on the phone. Now he had only one white cup of coffee on his desk. Fraser thanked us for coming in. "You can feel better that you didn't kill the Coletti woman," he said solemnly. "But we will have to discuss your actions that night with your parents." Randy and I eagerly hurried out the door. The rain had slowed to light sprinkles, but the sky was still dark as night. We had turned onto the sidewalk and were halfway to the car when a figure stepped off the curb. Todd. "Oh no," Randy whispered. "I told him this morning I was coming here." Todd moved quickly toward us, lumbering under the weight of an oversized black overcoat. As he moved closer, I could see the expression of rage on his face. "Hey," he yelled, blocking our path. "I told you not to go to the police." Chapter 24. "I warned you," Todd said menacingly. "Todd, whoa," Randy cried, pushing him back with both hands on the front of his coat. "No more. I mean it. I told you this morning I was doing this, and I did it, and I don't want to hear another word about it." He backed up, a look of surprise on his face. "We didn't kill her," I shouted. "Todd, that's the big news. We didn't do it." "Huh?" His mouth dropped open, his blue eyes bulged in confusion. Randy wrapped her arms around him and hugged him. He was so huge in that big coat, her arms barely went around him. "We didn't kill her," she exclaimed joyfully. "It wasn't our car that killed her." "We should have come here right away," I said, wiping a cold raindrop off my cheek. "Then we would have known that it wasn't us." But, Todd sputtered. I could see that he was thinking hard, trying to understand. Randy sat back beside me. "Let's all go to my house. We can talk about it." She pulled the car key from her coat pocket. "Come on, let's get out of the rain." "No," I said, louder than I'd planned. "No, I really want to be by myself for a while, Randy." She grabbed my arm. "Come on, Natalie. It's raining. It's a cold, miserable day. Get in the car." "No, really," I insisted. "You and Todd go." "At least let me drop you home," Randy pleaded, glancing at Todd. I glanced over her shoulder at the green Volvo, still parked by itself in the little lot. Why was Randy so eager to get me back into the car? The question forced its way into my mind. Was she just being nice? Was she so excited by the lieutenant's startling news that she really wanted to talk about it? Or did she have some other reason? Had she and Todd planned this? Suddenly, all of my happiness over the lieutenant's news faded away. I'm never going to be able to trust my friends again, I realized with a shudder. I'm always going to suspect them. I'm always going to wonder the truth about them, about how Carlo and Jillian died. "Thanks," I told Randy, "but I'm going to walk for a while, by myself." She and Todd both protested, but I turned sharply and began walking quickly the other way. The light was with me, so I crossed the street and kept walking. I didn't glance back. I found myself on a block of small shops. There were customers in the bakery on the corner, but the other stores were mostly empty, probably because it was such a gloomy, threatening morning. I walked aimlessly down Division Street. The rain started to come down again, a cold, bone-chilling drizzle, but I didn't bother to pull up my hood. It felt so good in my hair and against my hot cheeks, so refreshing, as if it were washing away all that had happened. As I walked, I tried to sort out my thoughts, but I found myself as mixed up as ever. I should feel overjoyed, I told myself, to discover that it wasn't our car that killed the mayor's sister. But Carlo and Jillian were never out of my thoughts. I could not feel joy, or even relief. I couldn't feel anything at all. As I crossed the street, a scrawny black cat ran in front of me, so close I nearly tripped over it. Watching it scamper across the rain-soaked street, I laughed out loud. "You're too late," I called to it bitterly. "I already have all the bad luck I can use." As if on cue, the rain began to come down harder, sheets of freezing rain. Pulling my hood over my hair, I leaned into the wind and scrambled under the glass bus shelter on the corner. The rain pounding on the shelter roof sounded like 1,000 drummers, beating a relentless rhythm. The North Shadyside bus came about 5 minutes later. It took me to a corner a block from my house. The rain had slowed once again to a drizzle. The bare trees shook in the sharp wind. The bus tires sent a tidal wave of water splashing over the curb as it pulled away. I lowered my head and started walking toward home, taking long strides. I can finally tell Mom and Dad about that horrible night, I decided. Maybe that will make me feel a little bit better. We are usually a very open family. We're not the kind of people who keep our feelings locked up inside. The three of us like to say what's on our mind. Keeping the secret from Mom and Dad had made me feel even more like a criminal. Every time I sat down to dinner or found myself alone with them, I had the strong desire to tell them about the night and the accident. Now, I told myself, I finally can. I turned the corner and my house came into view. I started walking faster. I stopped when I saw the car in the driveway. Keith! As I started to run, my shoes sending up splashes of rainwater, I saw Keith step out from under the porch. He moved quickly down the driveway to meet me. Keith, you're here, I cried. He wore a faded denim jacket with the collar pulled up and faded jeans. His brown hair was slicked down by the rain. I'm so happy to see you, I exclaimed. I threw my arms around him. Standing in front of his car, we hugged, holding each other tightly for a long time. Where were you? He asked when we finally let go of each other. I was worried. I sputtered. I took a deep breath. Randy and we went to the police. Keith, you won't believe? I stopped short when I saw his car. I had seen the car 1,000 times, of course, but now, staring over his shoulder, I saw it in a frightening new light. The car was blue, sky blue. I lowered my gaze to the dented bumper with its rusted chrome, and then to the tires. I let out a low gasp when I saw that the tiny spare tire was still on the right front wheel. One wide tire and one skinny tire. Lieutenant Fraser's black and white photo burst into my mind. I saw the tire tracks on the muddy road. One wide track and one skinny. A blue car. Oh, Keith, I cried. When I raised my eyes to him, his expression had changed. His dark eyes glared at me like cold marbles. His lips were twisted into an angry scowl. Keith, your car, I started, but he grabbed my arm, hard, and shoved me. Natalie, get in the car, he ordered in a cold, hard voice I'd never heard before. Get in the car. Chapter 25. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. Let go, I shrieked. You're hurting me. He loosened his grip, but held onto my arm. Sorry, he said softly. He pulled me toward the passenger door. Get in, Natalie. I'm not going to hurt you. You already hurt me, I told him. Get in, he repeated impatiently. I just want to explain, that's all. I pulled back, my heart pounding. Where are we going? Nowhere. Just driving around, just so I can explain. He opened the car door. I found myself wedged between him and the door. Get in, Natalie. Don't look so frightened. But, Keith, I lowered myself into the car. Open the driver's door, he ordered. He slammed my door shut. The whole car shook. I wanted to run away. I realized I suddenly felt terrified of him. But how far could I run? If I pushed open the door and tried to escape down the street, he would catch me before I went half a block. And I wanted to hear his explanation. I desperately needed to know the truth. I have to listen to him, I told myself. Keith and I have been so close. I owe it to him to listen. So I pushed open the driver's door for him. He slid behind the wheel. The car started on the third try, and he backed down the drive. We drove for several blocks before either of us said a word. The rain pattered down steadily. The windshield wipers clicked in a slow rhythm, smearing the glass as they brushed away the raindrops. Keith, the night of the party, I started hesitantly. Did you? The words caught in my throat. He slowed for a stop sign, then turned the car onto River Road. He squinted straight ahead through the smeared windshield, but his eyes seemed far away. Keith? He didn't even seem to hear me. The tires slid on the slick pavement. His expression didn't change. Keith, you said you wanted to explain, I urged softly. His silence was frightening me more than his cold expression. Finally he spoke, in a tight, hoarse voice. I came after you that night, the night of the party, he said. I saw you leave with Todd. I guess I sort of lost it. You mean you drove? I asked. I think I knew what Keith was going to say, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to hear him say it. I know I shouldn't have driven that night, Keith replied. He let out a choked sob. Believe me, Natalie, I know, but I came after you. I guess I was really drunk. I was driving too fast. I got lost. I missed a turn and slid into the dead-end street. I smashed into the parked car there. Keith gripped the wheel tightly in both hands. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes narrowed straight ahead through the windshield. I killed her, Natalie. I killed the mayor's sister, he continued, his voice breaking with emotion. And then his next words made my heart stop. They came out in a whisper, but I heard them so clearly, and I knew I would hear them forever. Natalie, Keith whispered, staring straight ahead. I killed Carlo and Jillian, too. Natalie, I killed them all. Chapter 26. My entire body shook. I took a deep breath and held it, trying to force myself to stop trembling. Keith, why? I demanded, staring at him in horror. He didn't answer my question. His eyes seemed so far away. I couldn't tell if he even heard me. I was in a total panic, he said finally. I got out of the car. I saw that the woman was dead. I hit her car so hard. Her head went through the windshield. Part of her face. It was completely torn off. There was blood everywhere. Everywhere. I shut my eyes. My stomach lurched. I struggled to fight down the waves of nausea. The street was empty. No one around, Keith continued. I got back in my car. I was so scared and so messed up I couldn't think, so I just drove away. He slowed the car around a curve. We were climbing higher, I saw, following River Road up to the cliffs overlooking the river. The windshield wiper scraped over the glass. The heater sent a blast of warm air over my trembling legs. I called the next morning, Keith continued. I wanted to tell you what I'd done. I needed help, but you cut me off. You wouldn't talk to me. I didn't know, I stammered. I thought you were just calling to apologize, so I had to talk to someone, Keith interrupted. So that evening, I went over to Carlo's house. I told Carlo the whole story, everything. I just had to get it off my chest. He shook his head bitterly. I begged Carlo not to tell anyone. I begged him to keep it secret, but it was too much for Carlo. It was messing up his head. A few days later, he called me. He said I should go to the police. He said he'd come with me, but I refused. Carlo said he couldn't take it anymore. He said he would go to the police by himself. I was out of my head, Keith continued. I was so scared. I didn't want my whole life ruined. I was so crazed I was ready to do anything, anything. And then I talked to you, Natalie. Me? I cried. About killing Carlo? No, Keith shook his head. You told me about Todd. You told me that Todd had threatened to kill Carlo, that Todd thought Carlo should have an accident. So then I knew that I could shut Carlo up for good, and everyone would blame Todd. I gasped. You were there at the hunting lodge, I accused. You shot Carlo. Shot him with his own gun. He was so surprised to see me, he dropped the gun, Keith revealed. I shot him through the head, shot my friend through the head, and put the gun back in his hand. We spun around a sharp curve. The car hesitated on the hill, groaned, then continued on. Keith suddenly turned to me. Do you know how frightened I was, Natalie? Do you know how totally panicked I had to be to kill my own friend? I swallowed hard. I couldn't answer. And then there was Jillian, Keith continued. She called me. She told me that Carlo had told her the whole story. Jillian, I murmured. Just saying her name made me feel like bursting into tears. Jillian, Keith repeated darkly. I warned her not to tell. I sent her rotten meat with the message. I tried to scare her, to show her I wasn't kidding around, but she planned to tell the police about me. You killed her too, I stammered. Had to, Keith murmured. His features suddenly twisted in pain. His eyes were so cold, so far away. Had to. He repeated the words in a sing-song, like some kind of sick chant. Had to. He lowered his foot on the gas. The car groaned, then lurched forward, picking up speed. Now I have one last problem, Keith said softly. You. A stab of fear made me gasp. Despite the blasting hot air from the heater, my entire body suddenly felt cold. Keith, what are you going to do? I choked out. Kill you too, he replied. Chapter 27. Keith, slow down, I screamed. He deliberately pressed down on the gas. The car spun around a curve, the tires screeching as they slid over the wet pavement. River Road came to a dead end at the end of a cliff, I knew. Unless Keith slowed down, we both plowed right over the cliff. Keith, please, I shrieked. The trees whirred past in a dark, frightening blur on my right. On Keith's side I could see nothing but black sky. The road narrowed as it twisted up to the top. The rain battered the windshield. The wiper blades scraped out their maddening rhythm. Keith, we have to talk, I screamed. His voice came out low and steady. Nothing to talk about now, he murmured. His eyes narrowed straight ahead. You know everything, Natalie. Everything. Keith, the road ends in a minute, I shrieked, grabbing the door handle. It's a dead end. Slow down, please. He ignored my shrill pleas. Bye, Natalie, he said softly. I'm going to jump out. You're going over the side. I'll tell them my brakes gave out. Another terrible accident. No, I screamed. Please, Keith, please. The dead-end sign came up to my right. Keith, the sign, I pleaded. The road ends right up here. A loud bang startled us both. It sounded like a gunshot. Inside the car, I saw Keith's eyes go wide. He jammed his foot on the brake. The car skidded, squealed and skidded. It started to slide out of control. It was a tire, I realized in that instant. That tiny spare tire had popped. Keith jammed his foot harder on the brake. We spun toward the cliff edge. As the car slowed, I shoved open my door. I took a deep breath and jumped out. I hit the ground hard, landed on my elbows and knees. Pain shot out through my body, swirling red pain. It took my breath away. I started to choke. I realized I had landed in soft mud. The mud helped cushion the fall. Still gasping for breath, I raised my head. I saw the car. It skidded toward the low guardrail at the cliff edge. "Jump, Keith," I urged silently. "Jump!" Why isn't he jumping out? I asked myself. Grabbing onto a pole, I pulled myself up out of the mud. "Jump! Jump!" Then I remembered. The driver's door. It's always stuck. He could never get it open. The car smacked into the guardrail. The sound was surprisingly quiet. The guardrail bent, then gave way. I could see the tires spinning as the car plunged over the cliffside and disappeared from view. A second later, I heard a crash. Shattered metal and glass. Then an explosion. A fiery ball of bright yellow rose up against the black sky. Over the patter of rain, I heard the crackle of flames down below. One final accident. Those dreadful words burned into my mind. One last accident. Sobbing, covered in cold, wet mud, I clung to the pole, struggling to catch my breath. The rain washed over me. I held tight to the pole, my entire body shivering. I turned and saw that I was clinging to a road sign. I was clinging to the dead-end sign. Dead end. This is the end, I thought. The end for Keith. The end of all the horror he created. Randy, Todd, and I still had a rough road to travel. We still had to pay for what we had done that night. But we had come to the end of the horror, the dead end. I turned and let go of the sign and began the long walk back to town. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Dead End by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street novel, Book 29. Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you very much for joining me for my production of Dead End by R.L. Stine from the Fear Street series. I don't know about this one. This one was kind of mediocre. So there's a dead-end street in Shadyside, and Keith got jealous that Natalie got into a car with Randy and Todd and followed her home, but he was so drunk that he hit and killed the mayor's sister. And then what? Did Randy's car hit the same car? They saw the dead body inside the car move, and they all assumed that they killed the mayor's sister? Because that's not very clear. They hit a car, someone inside the car moved, they assumed it was the mayor's sister, and that kicked off the entire plot, with all the threats and stuff. I don't know, this was kind of slow. It wasn't very fun. It took a long time to record because of circumstances, and it was kind of a slog just to get through. This is not my favorite book. Do I recommend this book? Not really. I give it like a 5 out of 10. It's okay. It's not great. I'm glad I read it, but I'll probably never read it again. I'm more the supernatural fan when it comes to Fear Street. I really, really enjoy the secret bedroom, the cheerleader stuff, the Cataluna Chronicles, haunted houses like 99 Fear Street. I like the lore of Fear Street, like the Fear Street Sagas trilogy. I like that stuff. This is kinda, it's okay. The twist at the end with Keith, as soon as the lieutenant said that the car had mismatched tires, I knew it was Keith, because his car had that spare tire on it from the very beginning. And then when Natalie runs up to Keith, and she sees the car, and she puts it all together, he's like, get in the car, and he tries to kill her. I mean, that's just classic Fear Street. That's classic misdirection. The reader thinks it's Todd the entire time, but it's not. It's really somebody else that you don't suspect. It's a safe character, and Keith fit that bill perfectly until the very end of the novel. So it's got a good twist at the end. So what should I read next? I have no idea. Please give me a suggestion. Write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I love seeing what you guys have to say. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. Any help will be greatly appreciated. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.